So a concern was raised in Australia that the percentage of deaths of Aboriginal prisoners was higher than the percent of deaths of non-Indigenous prisoners, which is 0.27%. So we want to state the type 1 and type 2 errors in terms of this problem, and again the consequences of each error. And that last part we do not need. All right, so the solution, so again, in this case we're dealing with qualitative data, okay, whether they died or not. So we're going to be dealing with proportions or percentages. So P is going to be the proportion of all Aboriginal prisoners who died, and then our sample proportion P hat is going to be the proportion in that random sample who have died. So in this case, as we set up our null and alternative hypothesis, they fear that it is higher, so we're going to have this percentage is higher than 0.27%. Okay, or we could write that as P is greater than 0.0027. So again, remember percent literally means divided by 100. So if we take 0.27 and divide by 100, we get 0.0027. And the null hypothesis is a statement of no change. So this proportion or percentage is equal to 0.27%. So again, a type 1 error by definition is rejecting HO when it's in fact true, which means concluding HA is true when it really isn't. So in this case, committing a type 1 error, so a type 1 error would be rejecting that the proportion of Aboriginal prisoners who died was this 0.27%, so rejecting HO, when in fact that is true. So when in fact it was 0.27%. Okay, in this case we would conclude that that proportion of deaths is actually greater when it really isn't. Okay, so in this case this would mean you would conclude there is a problem when there really isn't one. So again, you may spend time and energy researching a problem that doesn't exist. Now, on the other hand, if we were to make a type 2 error, which is failing to reject HO when HO is in fact a false statement, okay, which means you wouldn't conclude that the percentage is greater than 0.27 when it really is. Okay, so here a type 2 error would be failing to reject the proportion of all Aboriginal prisoners who died was 0.27%. Okay, so it'd be failing to reject HO, so the proportion of all Aboriginal prisoners who died was 0.27%, when in fact that percentage, it is higher than 0.27%. Okay. So this means you wouldn't think there was a problem when there really is one. So now you think there there isn't a problem when there really is one. So as we said earlier, we hope when we do a hypothesis test, you need to keep in mind that there's the 4-block scenario. So in 2 of those blocks, we actually make the correct decision at the end of the day. And so again, through random sampling and large enough sampling and so on, we hope that we minimize the probability that we make either type of error. But we do need to keep in mind at the end of the day, when we make inferential decisions, they are simply educated guesses. And so sometimes those guesses, even though educated, they are wrong. And so we do need to keep these 2 types of error in mind.